Hey guys, it's Makeshift. This is the second video in my plush clothes patterning series, and the first video covered a few different ways on how to pattern plush clothes. And this video is going to go over the paper towel patterning method. It involves draping paper towels over the plush to create a rough version of the clothes that you want, and then you're going to draw where you want the seams, and then you are going to cut it apart and you have a pattern. This is a great option if you can't find a similar item to harvest for the pattern, either due to the size or the shape, or if you would just prefer not to buy something to take it apart. Some of the materials you'll need for this method is obviously a set of paper towels. I like to use Viva paper towels because they are very soft and they behave more like cloth. And so I find this a little bit easier to simulate clothes with as compared to some of the cheaper paper towels that are much more paper-like. It's just a lot easier to work with these soft Viva paper towels, but they are a little bit more expensive. You're also going to need a marker to mark on the paper towels. I recommend using something not permanent just in case you accidentally mark on the plush itself. And I recommend using a water-soluble or an air-soluble fabric marker, preferably a water-soluble, because you might be making marks that you would like to stay on over a long period of time while you're developing the pattern. You'll also need a pair of scissors to cut apart the paper towels. I highly recommend just using craft scissors and not any scissors for fabric, because cutting apart paper towels with fabric scissors will dull them and you want to keep them nice and sharp for cutting your fabric. You'll need some pins for pinning the paper towels together, and you'll also need some tape at some points if you need to tape the paper towels together, and you can just use normal Scotch tape. And a couple optional things. I like to put my plushies on a Lazy Susan for easy turning around rather than having to handle them. I just find it more convenient. And then also you'll have to prop them up if they can't stand on their own. So I have them on a little doll stand here, and so it's very nice and easy to just turn him around. So this is the plush that I'm going to be developing clothes for. He is in his birthday suit right now, but he needs a real suit. So I'm going to pattern some pants and I'm going to pattern a button up. So I'm also going to break this up into two videos because it's going to get a little lengthy. The first video is going to be patterning his pants and the second video is going to be patterning a button up. So I'm going to pattern some pants for Ichiban, and I'm going to put some shoes on him that I have because I want to make sure that the pants land on the shoes nicely. And so if you have other items that you need to account for when developing your pattern, you should go ahead and put them on at this point. So I put his shoes on him, and now I'm ready to go ahead and start draping the paper towels over the body to form the pants. And by the way, if you're more of a reader instead of a visual learner, I also have a written tutorial on my website, which there's a link in the description, and I also pattern something different. I pattern a jacket. So I just have a single piece of paper towel, and when I do this patterning, I typically always do one side of the body if it's going to be a symmetrical object like pants. So I'm just going to do the patterning on one side, and then I'm just going to mirror it in the pattern itself so that it doesn't become uneven. So I'm just going to start by putting paper towel in general area where I want the pants to land. And I'm going to overshoot the middle here, so obviously the pants should be centered right on his crotch, but I'm going to go a bit beyond just to have some wiggle room. And I'm going to pin it into place. And then I'm going to turn them around. And pin right about in the middle. This will be a bit harder because he has a tattoo running right down the back. Just gonna pin right through it if I can. There we go. Okay. So now he has this weird little skirt thing going on. So to make a little bit more sense of what's going on, I'm going to start by trimming the excess off. I'm going to peek in where his shoes are, and I'm going to just start sketching about where I want it to land. And I'm just gonna go way beyond once I draw the initial line, because I don't want to undershoot. And it's very easy to add more paper towel. If you do cut things too short, you can either tape it on or you can pin it on, but it's just easier if you start too big and trim it down rather than the other way around. And you can really see why the Lazy Susan is very helpful in this situation, because it's a lot easier just to spin him around rather than have to pick him up and maneuver him. So for pants, I actually like to split this kind of into two pieces, where I form a tube that forms the actual pant leg and then treat the crotch area a bit separately. So I'm going to take my scissors and gently kind of cut right along the crotch area so that I can tuck this in to form more of a pant leg. I'm going to do the same on the back. Okay, so now I can fold this into a pant leg. And I want to cut a little bit more on this front leg. And now I'm gonna pin this together. And this is way overshooting. There's significant overlap in the paper towel. You don't have to worry about where your paper towel lines up right now. We're going to be drawing our seams on at a later point and cutting it all apart, so this can be pretty messy. And when I pin the paper towels together, I try my best not to pin the actual plushie, because you're going to have to take this paper towel off the plush at one point, and it's just harder if it's attached to the plush. So now it's actually forming a nice little pant leg, and we need to make his pants a bit more tailored since they're covering his shoes too much, so I'm going to cut down to that original seam line that I had drawn, see if that's a better length, and then we can cut more if we need to. Okay, so I like how this is landing on that shoe a lot better, where it's not completely covering up the top of the shoe. It's probably not perfectly tailored up to where you would want it for a human, but it's just a cute little plush, so who cares, right? Okay, so now we have to fix the crotch part, because he has an open crotch pair of pants, which is pretty inappropriate. So I'm just going to take another piece of paper towel, and I'm just going to kind of connect it right where paper towel starts to end, the original one, and then I'm going to pull it underneath and up to the back. And I want it to be somewhat close to his body. I don't want it to hang down too much. And I'm just going to pin it into place. So now looking at this again, it looks like his pant leg is a little too uneven here. You can see how much higher this side is than the other side. So I'm going to trim this other side to match. But if you run into a situation like this, you can either Keep in mind when you're transferring it to a pattern that you cut that side too small, or you can just go ahead and add some paper towel by taping it on or pinning it on. And it's still pretty uneven, the cuts, but I can just even that up myself, like this little jagged area here. So there is a little area in here where there's no paper towel, but I think that'll be okay. I'm not gonna transfer that hole or anything. But now I can go ahead and start marking where I'd like my seams to be, because otherwise I like how this is looking. Since he isn't too curved back here, it's alright being flat. Gonna take our water soluble fabric pen now, and we're gonna start drawing on where we want the seams of these pants to be. So you can make them as realistic as you want to real pants, but plushy pants I usually don't care how similar they are as far as like how the zipper area works. So I just like to draw a seam right down the middle. So then just going all the way down the crotch area and then going to the back. And I can't really see underneath it right now, but I can join this seam together when I end up cutting it apart. So I don't want a seam on here. I would like the seam to be on the inside of the pant leg. So I'm just going to draw a seam in here. Okay. And I think that's where I want my only two seams to be. I guess now that I look at it, his waist is a bit too high here on this plush, but I needed to add seam allowance anyway, so you can either leave it or you can trim it off. I think I'm going to leave it and just remember that I already have seam allowance here, and it's pretty even here on the waistline. It's not dipping too much or anything. Another thing is if you have other darts or things where maybe you needed to make this a bit more tapered, and if you have to add a dart here, you would kind of just pinch the paper towel and fold it in on itself, and then you would be able to draw the dart itself. So I would draw where the dart is on the top, and then where it would connect on the bottom, and then when you take it apart you kind of see the triangle that it makes. But I don't need a dart for these pants. It's just too complicated for something so simple. So now I can start taking this apart for the pattern. So I like to kind of trim this off while it's on the plush. So I'm going to start by just trimming this off, and you have to be super careful, and I'm going to cut along my seam lines that I drew with my craft scissors. And here is where, if you started attaching paper towels to themselves, you need to make sure that they're going to stay connected, because if it comes apart when you take this part, then you just lost the pattern that you made. So I'm going to pin this paper towel together again, because it's going through the paper towel into the plush. So once I remove that pin, it's going to fall apart. And just make sure you don't cut your plush. This is another reason why using craft scissors is good, because you're less likely to cut through your plush with a dull pair of scissors. If you're using fabric scissors, then you could easily cut through it. To trim this extra piece off the top. I'm going to take this plush off the stand because it's getting really difficult to see what's going on now and get a better view. Okay, so now I have a better view of what's going on, so I can finish trimming this apart. And so in that area I mentioned, since I'm going to be trimming this up to that other seam, I need to make sure that this connects here. Might actually tape that together, as this is two separate pieces of paper towel that I joined with pins. So if I just cut that, then it's just gonna fall apart. Alright, one last cut, then I should be able to actually take this off of the plush. If your pieces start to move, you can just kind of line up where your cut was. Should be easy to tell. So here's the pattern. It's a pretty odd little shape. And so with one like this, it's not always super obvious which side is the front and which is the back. So I know this was the front because this was the area where I had that little hole that I had to patch with that tape. So I can just mark this as the front just so I don't forget, and then I can mark this as the back. So now I can trace this onto paper to make an actual pattern from. So now I'm just going to trace this pattern onto a piece of paper. I'm going to add seam allowance because I always add seam allowance to my patterns. If you don't like to add seam allowance to your patterns, you can just trace it onto paper anyway. You don't want to really keep this paper towel pattern because it'll fall apart very easily. I already added seam allowance to the top here. Remember, I patterned it a little bit too high, so I'm just going to not add any up here, but you just want to trace the shape onto a piece of paper. Want to hold it down, trace around the edges. If you get like an uneven part like this, you can kind of just straighten it out. And then same with the bottom of the pant leg, it was very jagged, so I'm just going to draw a smoother line and then finish up back here. The front and the back. I'm going to clean this up. And now I need to add seam allowance, so I'm just going to add 1/4 inch on all the sides except that top one. So I'm just gonna do one double check, which is these pant legs need to be the same length here, and just looking at it, it looks uneven. So I'll just quickly even them up, and this is 2 1/8. So this needs like another 1/4 inch here. And then just kind of connect like that. So also, because this is pants, I want to be able to hem the bottom, so I want a little bit more than just the 1/4 inch, but for a lot of other things the 1/4 inch should be fine. But I want to be able to turn up the fabric enough to where the raw edge isn't going to poke out the bottom of the pants. So I'm just going to add another 1/4 inch. You would also want to do this for the ends of shirt sleeves. Okay. But I actually decided that I want to go ahead and add an actual waistband to this pant pattern just to make it a little bit more realistic. So on my pants pattern, I'm just going to mark a 3/4 inch line at the top. Connect this line. And now I'm going to cut this out and make this top a separate piece, and I'm going to add seam allowance to where I cut the pattern apart. So this is a very similar technique to color blocking in normal plush making, if you're familiar with that, except I'm not going to be changing the color here. I'm just going to be sectioning off part of the pants to make the illusion of a waistband. And I did end up deciding that the waistband was a little bit too low on the hips, so I'm also going to add just another 1/4 inch at the top. Transfer my back and front, and then going to add the 1/4 inch where I cut the pattern apart, and then an extra 1/4 inch at the top just to make them a little bit taller. It doesn't have to be perfect, I just want a little bit extra length at the top. And then rather than retracing this pattern, I'm just going to tape it down and then draw on the extra seam allowance where I cut it out. And then I'm also going to mark the front and the back because that got lost on this. So now I'm just going to cut these out. So now here are my 2 pattern pieces, and I'm going to have to cut this out 4 times, twice if you double up the fabric, because I want to line the waistband, so I want this to be a finished edge at the top. So what you would do first is sew together the pant itself. So down here, this pattern piece, I would cut 2 of these, and then I would sew the crotch areas first together, and then I would just sew the pant legs together, and then you would sew the waistband and then attach that, and that's going to make it a bit cleaner. I'll also add some belt loops to it, and that's just going to be a simple tube that gets top stitched onto one of the waistbands. If you're making it for the first time and you're working with a really expensive fabric that you want to use, I'd recommend making a test run out of muslin or some cheap fabric, but something similar to what you would like to use in the end. So if you're going to make something stretchy, you wouldn't want to test it out with muslin. You want to also test it out with a stretchy fabric, just because there might be some inconsistencies that come from the paper towel method, because it is a little bit rough. So I cut out 2 of these and I just sewed it along the edge here, and then you end up getting a band like this. And then I went ahead and made a tube of fabric and cut that tube into smaller pieces to make the belt loops here, and then just place them equidistant around the band. So now I'm going to top stitch the loops on the top and the bottom so that they stay in place, and then I can line this waistband and get it sewn on to the pants. So to line this piece with the belt loop, I'm going to take the other waistband, which has been sewn together at the sides, and then put it over so that the right sides, or the pretty sides, are together. And again, this is just to line the waistband so that there are no raw edges on it. And then line up the seams on the outside. and pin it in place. And then I'm just going to sew along the top edge here so that I can flip it right side out and then sew the remaining raw edge to the top of the pants. So here's the lined waistband, and again all I did was sew the lining waistband, which is the one without any belt loops, onto the top of the other waistband with right sides together and then flip it right side out. And I gave it a good iron too, which is important in clothes making if you're going to be using something other than minky. And now you can see we have a nice clean edge on the top and then one raw edge on the bottom here, which we're going to sew onto the pants. And you can see how important it is to finish off the edge of your fabric because this fabric likes to fray a lot. So we wouldn't want to have anything like this showing on our final product. So I have the pants here and I'm going to take the waistband and flip it so that the right side, which is the side with the belt loops, is on the inside, and I'm going to slip this over the pants so that I have right sides together. And even though my seams are supposed to be on the front, I'm going to have them off to the side just to make the front of the plush a little bit cleaner. So it's going to be a little more difficult to line up, and I'm just eyeballing it. So I'm going to line up those two belt loops right in the front. And then going to pin around the top the rest of the way. So now I can sew along this very top edge 1/4 inch seam allowance to finish off this final raw edge. Here are the finished pants. They fit him well and the waistband looks nice. It's an extra detail that adds some more realism to these tiny plush clothes as opposed to just having that simple top of the pants that we started with, and it fits well with his shoes. The overlap that we have looks good, and I'm happy with it. So I also have a video on how I patterned this shirt that you can check out, and it's going to be the next video in this series, so be sure to watch that if you also need to pattern some tops. So hopefully you found this helpful, and see you next time.